The palace was silent. Then came the envelope unmarked, hand-delivered, and meant only for William. What he read inside reportedly shattered him. Witnesses say the future king burst into tears, overcome by the weight of his father's final words. But what was written that broke the strongest man in the monarchy? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was a cold morning at Windsor when the letter arrived, slipping through the rigid routine of royal life like a ghost. No insignia, no herald. Just a single man in a dark coat who left it with a footman before vanishing through the gates. The envelope, thick with weight and sealed with wax, bore no name, yet it found its way directly to Prince William's private quarters. According to insiders, he held it for a moment, staring at it as if he knew the world inside was about to shift. And then silence. Not the poised silence of royal protocol, but something deeper, heavier, suffocating. Moments later, that silence shattered, replaced by the sound of a man breaking. William, stoic, composed, trained to never let emotion stain, the royal image was seen slumped in a chair, head buried in his hands, shoulders trembling. No words, just tears. Real, uncontrollable tears. Royal aides were said to have frozen, too afraid to speak, too stunned to move. The future king was unraveling before their eyes. The contents of the letter, as later confirmed, were from King Charles III himself, a final message, written in private and timed to be delivered precisely as Charles retreated from public life without warning. The palace has offered no comment, only issuing a vague statement citing the king's desire for quiet reflection. But behind those stone walls, the questions are multiplying. Why now? Why William? And most importantly, what was in that letter? Was it a father's final confession, weighed with guilt, secrets, and perhaps regret? Or was it something far more chilling, a command from a king to his heir, one last instruction that couldn't be trusted to the winds of history? Those closest to the situation say the timing was deliberate, strategic even. A storm was brewing within the monarchy, private pressures, mounting behind the smiling portraits and ceremonial handshakes. And this letter may have been the spark meant to ignite or contain it all. But to understand what pushed a future king to tears, we have to revisit the final days of the reigning one. While the world focused on public ceremonies, King Charles was quietly vanishing from the spotlight. Weeks before the letter reached William, the king had already begun disappearing, first from public duties, then from private meetings. What drove him into this sudden silence? It didn't begin with a grand announcement or sweeping change in routine. It began with absence. One event missed, then another. A cancelled appearance, a quiet withdrawal, a scheduled meeting suddenly postponed with no explanation. At first, palace insiders chalked it up to fatigue, the kind every monarch is entitled to feel after a lifetime of service. But those closest to the inner workings knew better. This wasn't rest, it was retreat. Charles was pulling away, not just from the public eye, but from the very institution he had fought to uphold. Senior staff noticed the shift. His personal aides spoke of locked doors and long silences. Royal doctors visited more frequently, leaving with furrowed brows and hushed tones. Whispers began to echo through the halls, concern, confusion, fear. But what truly unsettled those around him weren't just the missed engagements or the medical visits. It was who he was seeing in private. Over the course of several quiet weeks, Charles held extended sessions with his legal counsel. Not standard protocol meetings, but unusually long and deeply guarded discussions, away from even the most trusted eyes. Soon after came the spiritual advisors, men and women called in not for guidance on public image, but for something far more personal, something weightier, something final. The Queen Consort, Camilla, tried to maintain composure, but even she couldn't hide the storm behind her carefully curated expressions. During one high-profile outing, cameras captured more than just her smile, they caught the tremble beneath it. The hand clenching her clutch too tightly, the glances searching, unsure. She was spiraling, and behind her, so was the monarchy. Beneath the surface of declining health, insiders whispered of another affliction, one that couldn't be treated by medicine. Guilt. a quiet war that had apparently consumed Charles in the solitude of his later years. Those who knew him intimately said the burden he carried had grown heavier with time, unresolved tensions, decisions never explained, wounds never addressed, and somewhere within that spiral of silence and secrecy, he put pen to paper. The letter, now infamous within the palace, was not a spontaneous act of desperation, but a calculated decision. Weeks before it ever touched William's hands, it had been written, revised, and locked away. Its delivery was not a mistake of timing, but a precision strike set to arrive only when silence had become deafening, when distance had become final, and when Charles had already disappeared into a void few could follow. And while Charles slipped into the shadows, the letter remained locked away until the moment would hurt the most. He always thought there'd be time, a phone call, a final conversation. But when the letter arrived, it wasn't just a farewell, it was everything they never said. William's private grief had already been brewing long. Before the envelope was opened, in the public eye, theirs was a picture of resilience, father and son, two monarchs across a generational divide, bound by duty if not by ease. But behind the royal smiles and tightly choreographed gestures was a relationship frayed by years of quiet conflict. Words were rarely exchanged unless scripted, and emotions, when they surfaced, were buried under layers of formality. William had long carried a silent resentment, not only for Charles's distant parenting during his youth, but for the decisions that haunted the royal family's past, decisions that, in William's eyes, had fractured more than just tradition. Still, he believed, somewhere deep down, they'd find their moment. A private dinner, an unexpected embrace, a mutual acknowledgement of pain and pride. But that moment never came. Instead, all he was left with was paper inked in his father's fading hand, laced with sorrow, regret, and something far heavier. Sources close to the prince say the real breakdown didn't begin with the contents of the letter. It started years earlier, in a conversation that ended with slammed doors and months of silence. An argument so charged, so personal, that it became the point of no return. No one knows the exact words exchanged, but insiders confirm it was during the fallout of a decision William believed endangered the institution and his family. Since then, every encounter between the two men had been icy at best, painfully distant at worst. And yet, despite it all, William hoped. But time, as it often does in the palace, moved faster than forgiveness. Kate, ever perceptive, noticed the unraveling long before the headlines did. "He hasn't slept properly in weeks," she confided to a friend, her voice thick with worry. She knew what that letter meant, not just its contents, but its finality. It wasn't a conversation, it was a closing chapter, a one-sided goodbye, in a story that still needed telling. And for William, it wasn't just Charles's voice on the page, it was echoes of his mother, Diana, reverberating through every sentence. The pain of unhealed wounds, of watching history repeat itself, of becoming the man tasked with healing what his parents had left shattered. Those around him say he read the letter once, then again, dozens of times, sometimes in the middle of the night, as if searching for something, an apology, a reason, a sign that Charles had finally seen him. But what he found was something more complicated. There were emotions, yes, but also implications. Hints, warnings. And within those words, William realized the letter wasn't just a final attempt at connection, it was a calculated move. A trigger. But peace wouldn't come because what Charles wrote wasn't just emotional, it was political and explosive. Insiders claim the letter was more than goodbye, it was a confession. And in just 3 pages, Charles allegedly rewrote decades of royal history, exposing secrets the crown never wanted revealed. What William held in his hands wasn't just a message from a father to his son. It was a bombshell, sealed in royal wax and laced with truths buried beneath layers of silence. From the very first line, it was clear this was no ceremonial farewell. Charles didn't open with affection. He opened with remorse. Regret poured through every word, shaped by decades of choices that had rewritten not only his own legacy, but the lives of those he was meant to protect. He apologized to Diana, by name, a gesture so unthinkable in royal correspondence that aides reportedly questioned if it had been forged. But the sorrow was unmistakable, not for the failed marriage alone, but for the manipulation, the deceit, and the media warfare that followed. He wrote of the machine that had fed on her suffering. He wrote of how he let it happen. Then came the admission that left William hollow. Charles had questioned his own leadership, his role as a father, as a monarch, as a man. He confessed that in pursuit of protecting the firm, he had destroyed the family, that in shielding the crown from scandal, he had sacrificed truth, clarity, and most devastatingly, trust. And in a stunning admission that has reportedly sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, Charles acknowledged what many had suspected but never confirmed: Camilla's role in the breakdown between William and Harry. The letter didn't accuse, it reflected. He wrote that her presence, once meant to be healing, had instead deepened a rift no public gesture could repair. But perhaps the most jarring line, the one William reportedly read over and over, was chilling in its simplicity. They kept truths from you, and so did I. What truths? That question now hangs over the monarchy like a blade. The letter allegedly referenced documents hidden away, protected by loyalists, that detailed the final months of Diana's life, including claims she made that never reached the public. Charles did not say what was in them, only that William had a right to know, and that those records existed. The implication was clear. There were still pieces of the puzzle being deliberately kept from the man who would one day wear the crown. And then a directive, short, sharp, and unforgettable. Let truth guide you, not tradition. 6 words that shattered centuries of royal obedience. 6 words that could dismantle everything the House of Windsor had spent generations building. Because Charles knew what he was doing. This was no passive confession. It was a challenge, a test, a final act of truth from a man who had spent most of his life guarding secrets. And now, that truth was William's to bear. But royal truth has consequences, and outside the gates, the action was already building. Within hours, whispers about the letter reached royal insiders. Someone knew, someone talked. But was it a strategic leak or a betrayal from within? The message had barely begun to settle in William's chest when the cracks in the palace walls started to show. A discreet inquiry from a prominent journalist. A cryptic headline in a tabloid, too vague to confirm, too precise to ignore. Then came the flood, rumors of a letter, of confessions, of something so destabilizing it could fracture the monarchy's already fragile image. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't speculation. It was calculated. Someone inside knew the truth or enough of it and had passed it on. Panic took hold behind palace doors. Within minutes, royal communication channels were sealed, staff were ordered to silence, personal devices were monitored, access logs were pulled. What had been an internal reckoning had just become a national emergency. William, already on edge, demanded answers. Loyalty was no longer assumed, it had to be proven. Everyone, from senior aides to security personnel, was subject to scrutiny. This was no longer about grief. This was a breach, a threat, an act that felt as intimate as it was invasive. And as the future king tried to contain the fallout, another fire ignited Camilla. Sources say she erupted when the rumors reached her ears, calling it a disgrace, an insult, a betrayal of the man she had stood beside through decades of scrutiny. This should have died with him, she allegedly told aides, her voice laced with fury. But the damage was done. The silence Charles had orchestrated with such care was unraveling in real time. Then came the name no one expected, but everyone feared. Harry. Whispers began to circulate that he may have known about the letter long before William ever saw it. The suggestion sent shockwaves through royal circles, not because of the possibility itself, but because of what it would mean if it were true. Had Charles shared his final words with one son in private and left the other to uncover them through pain? Or worse, had someone ensured Harry saw it before William ever could? The palace, now in full damage control mode, issued a cold, clinical denial. No such document exists. But the timing was too precise, the details too accurate. The public wasn't buying it. The press didn't flinch. The leak had done its job. It had exposed not just a secret, but the very fragility of the crown's inner sanctum. The monarchy had spent decades mastering the art of silence, but now silence was a liability. And as William tightened his grip, surrounded by doubt and suspicion, the narrative was slipping away, controlled not by the crown, but by the chaos it left in its wake. Because secrets, once revealed, don't just haunt the corridors of power, they demand confrontation. As the monarchy scrambled behind closed doors, the public called for answers, and one name came roaring back into focus. Her name hadn't been uttered from the throne in years, but now, Diana was everywhere. And for William, the letter didn't just reopen wounds, it reawakened her legacy. Charles had written her name with care, almost reverence, as if he knew what it would mean to the son who had spent his life walking the tightrope between duty and memory. In the letter, he didn't rewrite history, he confronted it. "Your mother was right more often than I admitted," he confessed. "And you deserve to hear that from me." For William, those words weren't healing, they were haunting. Because Diana had never truly left him. Not when he walked behind her coffin at 15, not when he raised his own children with the warmth he never received. And now, not when her ghost had been summoned in a letter penned by the very man who once helped silence her. Timing couldn't have been more cruel or more poetic. As the public clung to leaked excerpts, a decades-old clip of Diana resurfaced. In it, she smiled softly and said, "The truth always comes out in the end." That truth, once whispered in back corridors, now roared across every front page, every social feed, every conversation that dared to question the royal facade. But for William, the noise outside only mirrored the storm within. Hours after the leak, he was seen near her memorial. No cameras, no press, just a son walking toward the past, as if drawn by a force that wouldn't let him go. The weight of the letter was no longer just about Charles. It had pulled Diana into the present, and with her, the questions she never got to ask, the answers he never knew he needed. Even Harry, fractured by exile and estrangement, broke his silence. A private message, brief but powerful, was delivered through quiet channels. "Mum would be proud of you. No other words, none needed." The message struck deep, reminding William that the bond they shared wasn't born of titles or bloodlines, but of grief, shared, unspoken, eternal. In the hours that followed, the world followed suit. Crowds began leaving tributes outside Kensington Palace. Flowers, letters, children's drawings, even old newspaper clippings from 1997. Social media exploded with images of Diana, not as a princess, but as a mother, a truth-teller, a woman who defied the crown's silence to speak her own story. Inside the palace, the reaction was different. Guards stiffened, advisors panicked. The re-emergence of Diana's name brought dread, not nostalgia. Because for the monarchy, she had never been a memory, they had tried to make her a myth. But myths don't write letters, and they don't leave sons with a legacy that can't be buried. Now they were forced to face her again, not as a scandal, not as a tragedy, but as the reckoning they had long delayed. The ghost they had never buried was no longer at the gates, she was inside the walls. And as Diana's spirit loomed large, one final chapter remained unread, sealed in the letter's last paragraph. 3 lines. That's all it was. But according to royal aides, those final 3 lines from King Charles changed William's destiny forever and may have just altered the monarchy's course. Tucked beneath the formal ending of the typed letter, almost like an afterthought, was a handwritten postscript, brief but searing. Not dictated, not edited, not reviewed by advisors. This was Charles in his rawest form. The first line struck with quiet thunder, "You are my rightful anchor to reform." No titles, no pomp, just a father, passing the weight of transformation to his son. It was a crown not of gold but of fire, one that demanded courage, not obedience. In that single sentence, Charles signaled what decades of silence never had, a shift, a hint that he would not return, that his time was over, not in death but in decision. The second line peeled away the last veneer of royal restraint. "They will try to silence you as they did her. Don't let them." And with that, the shadow of Diana returned in full force, not just as a memory, but as a warning. The same forces that had muted her voice, obscured her truths, and twisted her narrative now stood in William's path. Charles wasn't just admitting complicity, he was forecasting resistance. The machine still lived, and William would now have to face it. Alone, aides say William read those lines in private, long after the initial wave of grief had passed, when the palace had gone quiet again. And when he did, something in him broke not from weakness, but from the unbearable realization that everything he had once accepted as duty had just been redefined as choice. The third line wasn't even a line, just a single word, scrawled and circled in the bottom corner, ink bleeding through tear-stained paper: forgive. It was unclear who Charles was asking William to forgive: himself, the institution, the ghosts that now surrounded them both. But it didn't matter, because that word was no longer just a plea. It was a burden, one that now rested squarely on William's shoulders. There were no further instructions, no plans, no timelines, just a legacy passed not through coronation but through confession. What Charles left behind wasn't protocol, it was provocation. And William was left to interpret the silence between the words. He knew the walls would close in, he knew factions within the palace would rally to suppress the storm. But he also knew the world had changed. Truth had escaped its cage, and with it, the expectations that once bound him to a system he never chose. That letter was a map, but only he could decide if it led to revolution or surrender. But while the letter's contents echoed through palaces and headlines, William now stood alone with the truth and a decision. He didn't speak to cameras. He didn't release a statement. But every move William made in the days after. The letter spoke volumes, and a new prince emerged from the ashes. The palace went quiet, eerily so. For 72 hours, William vanished from public view. No engagements, no appearances, not even a prepared press release to mask the silence. And in that void, speculation exploded. But insiders weren't guessing, they knew. Something had shifted. William wasn't grieving anymore. He was reckoning. The letter hadn't just pierced the royal image, it had carved open a man long taught to bury emotion beneath duty. In those 3 days of silence, he wasn't retreating. He was transforming. Then came news that raised even more questions. A private audience with the Archbishop of Canterbury. No cameras were allowed, no transcript released. But for a future king, such a meeting, unannounced and deeply personal, meant more than faith. It meant preparation. Kate, once the unshakable pillar by his side, was seen leaving a secluded estate with tears in her eyes. Her posture heavy with the kind of weight only shared truths can carry. Those close to her said she was holding the line, but barely. Whatever William had shared with her had shaken her to the core, yet she stayed silent, loyal, as always. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, palace officials reported one unusual development. The letter, now infamous in every corner of royal operations, had been returned, not destroyed, not hidden away, but placed under lock and key in the royal vault, an act that said everything. William wasn't discarding his father's words, he was preserving them. For what purpose, no one could yet say. What became clear in hushed conversations among staff and advisors was this: he was no longer the same man who had bowed to protocol. Something inside him had broken, or perhaps awakened. He walks differently now, one aide remarked. Like he knows something we don't. Like he's already made a decision no one's prepared. Ed 4. That tension rippled outward, through the press office, the military guards, the extended family. The heir to the throne was no longer following the script. He was writing his own. And then, without warning, the silence ended. A press advisory was sent. Prince William would speak publicly. No title, no cause, no event attached, just a time and place. The world held its breath. Crowds gathered, cameras aligned, even members of the royal family took notice. What followed would not be a political speech. It wouldn't be a ceremonial reading. It would be something far more dangerous: truth, raw, unsettling, and unfiltered. And with the eyes of the world upon him, William opened his mouth and history shifted. The cameras rolled. William stepped forward, and with one trembling breath, he delivered a speech that would redefine the royal family, not with power, but with truth. For a moment, the world held still. No script, no teleprompter, just a man, no longer just a prince, not yet a king standing on the edge of history. And then, quietly, boldly, he spoke. He acknowledged the letter, not in code, not in vague allusions, but directly. I received a message from my father, he began, voice tight with restraint, written not as a monarch, but as a man seeking truth in his final hours of public life. The audience fell silent, and what followed was not ceremony, it was confrontation. William honored Charles not as the perfect ruler, but as a flawed father who, in the end, had chosen honesty over legacy. But he didn't stop there. He turned toward the invisible weight that had loomed over Buckingham for decades. Silence. He called it what it was: damaging, destructive, a tradition mistaken for strength. For too long, he said, we've measured resilience by what we bury, but silence is not dignity. And the cost of that silence has been pain, division, and loss. And then he did what no royal had dared to do so openly. He invoked both his parents in the same breath. I will honor both my parents, he declared, not just the roles they played in history, but the people they were beneath the crown, the humanity that was often stripped away by expectation and duty. The words didn't just resonate, they roared. And in the final moments, as if to tether himself to the father who had finally spoken with clarity, William chose Charles's last word, the one circled in sorrow, inked in regret. Forgive. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. That single word uttered in public, after generations of silence, was enough to crack the stone face of monarchy and expose something far more powerful than image: vulnerability. And it was in that vulnerability that the crowd, the country, the world found something they hadn't seen in years: hope. The reaction was immediate. Tears fell among listeners on the ground, strangers embraced, headlines shifted from scandal to rebirth. Social media overflowed not with criticism, but catharsis. For once, the royal family wasn't clinging to tradition for survival. It was letting go of the past to evolve. A monarchy, reborn in grief, now stood before the world, not as untouchable, but as human. The letter had begun in shadows, but its truth ignited a light none could have predicted. The letter was written in private, but its legacy will echo for generations. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.